By the end of our session this morning, we hope you will be able to do three things. First, we hope you will understand the components of the Redesign pre-service training. Second, we hope you will know how workers are responding to the pre-service redesign. And then third, last but not least, we hope you will understand how you can support your staff in completing the course and, most importantly, transferring that course learning to their child welfare practice. Here is our agenda for this morning. We'll spend the next 90 minutes after this orientation and introduction period talking about our pre-service redesign. First, we'll talk about the background of how our course has changed over the years. Then we'll talk about the focus of the current redesign, how you can support your staff in that redesign, our transfer of learning activities to help support staff in incorporating what they learned into their practice, and then we'll end with a Q&A session before we close out our 90 minutes. So I see a lot of you all are already using the chat pod. That will be the main way you will communicate with us this morning. You can use this chat box throughout the morning to send questions or comments throughout the session. We'll try our very best to answer all of your questions during this event. This box sometimes moves a bit fast, but don't worry. We have someone behind the scenes who's going to help us keep track of all of your questions. You'll also see that there are two options in the bottom left of this box that lets you send a message to everyone in this group or just to the host, meaning those of us here at UNC. So before we move forward, we'd like for you to practice using this chat pod, if you haven't done so already, by typing an answer to a very important question. What questions or goals do you have for this webinar this morning? What do you personally hope to hear or learn? So I'm going to wait just a minute for folks to type that in there, and then we'll move forward. All right, we see to see the new changes. What will the supervisor responsibilities be? Process for the TOL, expectations for a new pre-service. All right. Better understanding of what staff will experience. Absolutely. Great. Gain information on new pre-service for CPR consults. Absolutely. All right, thank you all for participating. So we're going to do our very best to make sure we answer all those questions and meet all those goals throughout our session today. Since this is just one 90-minute webinar and we have over 280 people expected to participate this morning, we know we will not likely be able to answer every single question or address every single goal, but we will do our absolute best. We also will be sure to share your questions and goals with others at the division, since we know there are lots of people who provide technical assistance, training, and other support on this critical topic. So here is another way that you can communicate with us this morning. So you have in your top toolbar, beside your microphone icon, it looks like a little person with their hand raised. Beside that person, there's a drop-down menu, and with that, you can raise your hand if you have a question at any point in time. You can let us know if you need us to speak louder or speed up or slow down. You can give us a round of applause. We would certainly appreciate that, but feel free to use those icons to communicate with us this morning. So before we move forward, we do have a quick question for you all. We just want to see who's in the room. So let me pull up a polling question for you. What is your role at your agency? So you should see a poll on your screen now. I'm opening it up for you to answer. If you will click on your role in your agency, director, program administrator, supervisor, direct service worker, trainer, staff development. If you are in that other role, if you will please type in the chat pod what your role is in your agency. So we see lots of supervisors, program managers, some directors, CPS assessment supervisor, CQI consultant, adoption supervisor. Okay. So if you are a supervisor in your agency, that will be captured in that supervisor button, DSS training administrator. Okay, perfect. So we'll give you guys just a moment to finish typing that in the chat pod. This just helps our presenters know what our audience is this morning. Good morning to you, Nash County DSS. Fabulous. All right, let me end that. So again, I would like to welcome each of you to today's webinar. My name is Tanya Jacobs-Deese, and I am a clinical instructor with the Jordan Institute for Families. We have technical help here from our colleagues Philip Armfield and John McMahon. They're going to help resolve any technical issues this morning, but we're very pleased to have a couple of very important panelists with us this morning. First, we have Ms. Ginger Caldwell, who is a program consultant and trainer at the Division of Social Services. We also have Ms. Kaye Moody, who's a program consultant and regional trainer with the Division of Social Services, and she's on the staff development team. We also have Ms. Jennifer Oshnock, who is a program monitor with the Division of Social Services in the Child Welfare Services section. And then we also have Mr. Southey Blanton, and he's going to be here for any technical issues or questions folks have about the pre-service redesign on NCSW Learn. If you've ever wondered who was behind that help desk on NCSW Learn, that is Southey, so you'll get to meet him this morning. So thank you all for all of our presenters for all of their time working on this webinar. They have worked tremendously hard to make sure they can give you as much information as possible about the redesign in a short 90-minute webinar. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Ginger Caldwell, who's going to give us some background on the webinar.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to see the range of leadership and participation from so many of you from so many counties. We're just excited to have this opportunity to talk with you about the redesign of the pre-service training. We know there's been enormous interest in it, and so thank you so much for making time for this morning. So when we started thinking about where we needed to start, we said we probably need to do a very brief look at the history of pre-service training, and then also a little bit of, and somebody was interested in this, how pre-service has changed over the years. So let's jump right into that so that we can then get to those goals that you commented on in the chat box. So as most of you probably know, pre-service training is required by law, a minimum of 72 hours for staff who were hired on or after January of 1998. And so you see the law is referenced there, and as you probably already know, that is also the same law that requires us to provide additional training to all child welfare staff during that first year. So the law references these three items that are on your screen, with an emphasis on the importance of orienting new staff to child welfare practice before they assume any direct client contact responsibilities. And then, of course, providing family-centered practice training is also named, and then covering state and federal laws that are relevant to child welfare services, especially laws that relate to the rights of the parents and the children who are receiving these services. So that's just a quick review of why pre-service began. So let's take a look at how the course has changed over the years. And I saw somebody was particularly interested in that. So as I mentioned, it began in 1998. And as you see here on the screen, from 1998 through 2006, all of the training was in the face-to-face classroom. And then beginning in 2007, the course became blended, which, as you know, means that some of the content was online and some of it was in the face-to-face classroom. So you see for 2016, the course remains blended with less classroom days and an increase in the number of online hours. So we've moved from 11, well, starting out with 12 classroom days now to 8 classroom days since 1998. So, Tanya, I believe we have a poll question to kind of see how many of the staff have attended, or how many of those represented in the webinar have sent staff to the redesigned version. So if you all would just let us know how many of your staff, if you know, have taken the pilot redesigned version of our course, just so we can see how many may have experienced it already. So it looks like many of you don't know of anyone yet who's attended the redesign course, and that's fine. But there are others of you who know one or two who may have attended, and so a little bit later on in our presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the response of those who have experienced the redesigned version. So thanks for kind of letting us know what your experience so far is with sending staff to the redesigned version. So in thinking about the purpose of the redesign and about kind of what inspired us to restructure pre-service training, we have this picture of a steering wheel, and because the steering wheel for us kind of represents two of the main contributing factors for our structural redesign of pre-service training. And one of those, very importantly, is related to the feedback we received from a lot of county leadership related to a request that we restructure pre-service so that the staff were spending less time behind the steering wheel, meaning less time driving to training and less time away from the office. And so, and of course that also relates to also some travel and savings costs related to travel. So that was a major inspiration for us restructuring pre-service, was the feedback we were receiving that you all would like for the staff to be away from the office less and traveling less to get to the training. Secondly, we were receiving a lot of feedback from supervisors who were saying, hey, we really want to know more about what our staff are experiencing. And some of you mentioned that in your goals for today. You really want to know more about what your staff are getting exposed to during the pre-service training. So that was our second reason for choosing the steering wheel. Is a lot of you said, as supervisors, we really want to feel more in the driver's seat on this and more available to support our staff and help prepare them, you know, for the complexities of the roles in child welfare. So we began several years ago. It's been a long process. And we began with the leadership of Rebecca Huffman at the division. We began looking at how to restructure pre-service and what the content would be once we did restructure it. And so we began a very important and helpful collaboration with UNC, the Family and Children's Resource Program. And just need to give a shout out to that team who has been instrumental in making this redesign possible. Many people have been involved, especially Vilma Jimenez, Kaye McLennan, Amy Ramirez, and of course, Philip and Southey, who are here helping us with the webinar today. So with that collaboration, we began to restructure pre-service and begin to decide what the content would be. So let's take a look at, well, what does it look like? And you actually have a version of this graph in your handouts, and it shows you one of the main structural changes is that the first week of pre-service training is in the agency. As you all know, historically the first week of training had been in the face-to-face classroom. So this is a major structural change. You see here that the first week happens in the class, see, I can't even get it straight myself. So it happens in the agency. And a little bit later you'll hear about how staff are responding to that. And as you see in the agency, there are two major components. A lot of it is self-paced online learning and also an activities workbook. So if we have time later, we can give you more details about what's included there and where to find the information about what is included in those modules. But anyway, just from a structural standpoint, the first week is in the agency, and then weeks 2 and 3 are in our face-to-face classrooms in one of our 5 regional locations. So when you look at this graph, you'll notice that it is not exactly like the one that's in your handouts. As Tanya mentioned, it's on page 5. This is the pilot version that you're looking at. We piloted that last section at the end that says live online transfer of learning session. We piloted that and concluded that at this time we would not be able to continue to offer that session, which was designed to be optional. And what we found was the attendance was very low, in part because when your staff get back to the agency, they become very busy. In addition, our trainers are also now tasked with offering additional courses or additional events, training events that makes them unavailable to lead a live online session 4 to 6 weeks later after their event has ended. So anyway, this was the version that we piloted. So everything remains the same except for the live online transfer of learning session. So if you're interested in comparing, what happened between the 4-week, which was the 11 days in the classroom, and the 8-day event, or the 3 weeks in the classroom, you also have a handout, and I believe it's page 4, that just gives you a little graph that helps you compare the content and the structure of the 2 versions. So if you've probably heard that we've been piloting since February of this year, and we began piloting in February, and we next week will be beginning the 5th of the 6th. Well, actually, I think it started this week, the time in the classroom, in the agency. So we're nearing the end of our 6 pilot events, but we still have openings for the event that begins in Asheville. So that it begins in June. So all of these pilot events are that structure that I just showed you, with it being 3 weeks, with the first week being in the agency. And of course, all of these events meet the 72-hour minimum training requirement. And someone had a question in chat earlier, I believe, about events going forward. We have already scheduled 15 events, pre-service events of this new version, this new model, with the 3 weeks being just like the graph on the previous page, for July to December. There are 15 of these events already scheduled. Okay, so we're moving along. We feel confident we'll be able to deploy this in July statewide. And so as part of beginning to prepare for the redesign, we thought a lot about you all, those of you who are in the role of supporting staff who then come to the pre-service training. So we have a number of things designed especially for you, and you see many of those listed here on the screen. And I think we mentioned earlier that this webinar is being recorded, so if you wanted to go back and listen to it, it would be a source of information and support for you. Also, you see listed there that NCSW Learn, it's going to play a key role in keeping you informed and keeping you familiar with the information that you need. And so one of the items listed there says supervisors orientation. On your supervisors resource page, and those of you who may be training managers, on your resource page within NCSW Learn, you have a link and an icon. We'll show that icon in a little bit, that will get you to the 10-minute narrated overview of the pre-service redesign. And it's kind of a one-stop shop for all you need to know to support your staff and to learn about what is the content of pre-service training. So it gives you lots of details, lots of items to click on, lots of resources that will help prepare you for supporting your staff who come to pre-service training. And we'll be talking more about those in detail in just a moment. And last but not least, you see there that we have a note that says emails from your trainers. So to keep you connected with what's happening during week 1, our trainers will be in contact with you by email should they identify a participant who needs some additional support or information while they're in the agency for that first week. So just briefly, here is an overview of the content changes that are reflected in the redesigned version of pre-service. Now that first one, new videos, I want you to find your applause icon, which is up there near that raise hand. And I know many of you are cheering loudly that we have finally incorporated some new videos into pre-service. So yes, I see some applause coming in. So yes, we have new videos. We're very excited about those, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a minute if we have time, but lots of new videos in both the online and the face-to-face classroom. Worker safety, we know that's an important and priority topic for you in your agencies. We've always had the worker safety online module, but we've now required that the 2 safety activities, worker safety activities, be completed and submitted to you as a supervisor, so you'll have that opportunity for more discussions around worker safety. Again, family youth voice, family youth perspective. We've even incorporated some of the Heart Gallery photos into our face-to-face classroom. Lots of examples of how we're including the youth voice both in the videos and in the discussions. As you all know, lots of new laws and policies have come about, especially in the past year. We have incorporated those. And of course, lots of content related to the trauma-informed lens when we're practicing child welfare, secondary traumatic stress, and protective factors have been woven throughout the content of the pre-service redesign. One thing I wanted to mention really quickly is there are a lot of resources that are available to your staff, either electronically or provided in a workbook that we will give to them. And these are designed to be like desk references or tip sheets that they can look back at later. Like a new one we are now offering is around medical homes. What is a medical home, and what is the CMEP program, and what's the social worker's role? Those kinds of things that can be a reference for your staff when they get back to the agency. There are lots more, but I can tell that I am out of time. So let me move on very quickly to, so those are the things that are some of the highlights of some of the changes. But there are lots of things that have not changed about pre-service. As you see the list here, the federal and state laws and child welfare policies clearly continue to be a huge focus in pre-service training. In addition, the focus on family-centered practice, which is last on your list there, but kind of first in my mind in terms of really it is about how we engage the family so that we can apply those laws and policies. And then you see there the other items listed. And yes, the Hobgood family is still, those of you who remember pre-service, the Hobgood family is the case that is still in there, and we apply that to all of the structured decision-making tools. So,
Ginger, I have a quick question from someone in the audience. So there was a question about permanency planning and whether that's discussed in detail. I don't know if you all want to answer that now or in a little bit.
So I'll start, and then Kay may have something to add. I mean, we certainly review all of the permanent plans and what they are, how they're defined, and we emphasize the importance of there always being concurrent planning, and that reunification is always, almost always, there are very few exceptions to that, where reunification is one of the permanent, is not one of the permanent plans. It's almost always one of those plans, always on the table. So yes, we define the plans and talk about where those are identified on the services agreement, at-home services agreement. Kay, what would you add to that, if anything?
In addition to that, we also spend some time defining the permanency planning action team, who's required to be invited, the purpose of that. We also talk about the differences between that and child and family team meetings. As Ginger mentioned, we also go over the service agreement review tool that goes along with permanency planning action team meetings.
Thank you. And one other quick question. So someone was very excited about the videos and wanted to know if they will have access to watch the new videos.
So, and I assume this is a question coming from like one of the managers, or not a direct services, because we had some direct services staff. So those videos are not available unless you are registered for pre-service. And we would invite you. You can register for pre-service, even if you took it back in 2004 or 5. If you'd like to come through pre-service again as a supervisor or as a program manager, we would love to have you. We would be delighted because we often find that we learn a lot from those of you who are in those leadership roles, and we would appreciate your participation. So you do get access to the videos as a result of being registered for the event. And of course, I can also say your staff may allow you to hover over their shoulder when they're watching some of the online the videos during that week 1 in the agency. So you might also consider that. Kay, anything else you would add to that?
And just in echoing what Ginger said, I think oftentimes what happens with supervisors, and it kind of happened to me when I was in supervision, is that sometimes your roles and responsibilities change. So I think that's also a added plus for taking pre-service training again if you have taken it before years ago.
Thanks, Kay. That's yeah, very helpful, because the conversations that happen then between staff and their leadership are really very productive when they've experienced the same event. Okay, and so Tanya, was there anything else you wanted me to address at this point?
Nope, that's it. We'll hold the rest of those questions for a little bit later. Thank you.
Okay, so I wanted to say one final thing before we move to our next, I believe we have another chat question, but one of the things that has not changed, and we've had lots of conversation about this, is, well, first of all, 2 things. One is that the online modules and all the online resources we're providing, staff can always go back and review those. We've had questions recently regarding, say, documentation, and we said, staff can always go back and look at the online module related to documentation to review that or any of the other modules that are available during that week 1 in the agency. They're not just available week 1, they will always be available to those who have registered and completed the course. And the second thing that has not changed is that unfortunately, pre-service it is still not possible for pre-service to fully provide a new staff member with all the knowledge and the skills and the abilities that they will need in order to be fully effective as child welfare practitioners. We wish it could. It just is not possible, as you all know, due to the complexity of the roles and the complexity of the types of situations that they are encountering. So, and with the redesign, we've made lots of efforts to provide as much information as possible to begin that process of thinking through what their professional development plans and goals will need to be. And a little bit later, Jennifer's going to talk more about a tool that we've incorporated that will help with the ongoing professional development. So before we do that, though, and we're going to hear from Kaye next, but before we do, I believe we have another chat question, and I believe it's related to either your reactions or the reactions of staff who have attended the pre-service redesign. What have they liked about it, or what have you picked up on that you see as a strength for the redesign of pre-service? And then if you'll put that into chat, and we'll take a look at those, and then Kaye will begin sharing with you some of the responses from our pilot participants.
Thanks, Ginger. So if folks will just type into the chat pod, what are some strengths your staff identified with the Redesign course? And then I'll turn it over to Kaye.
Thank you, Tanya. And as you guys are putting into chat some of your responses, I also earlier, Ginger kind of gave a shout out to a lot of the people that were instrumental in getting the pre-service redesign up and running. She failed to mention herself because Ginger has been instrumental in this. We couldn't have done this without her. She has been eating, sleeping, and breathing pre-service training for a really long time now. So in addition to putting your response in chat regarding your participants' feedback, I also want you guys to give her a round of applause for all of the hard work she's put into this.
Thank you.
And so some of the strengths that we've heard from, and earlier during the poll question, there was, if I calculated correctly, around 90 participants you guys have had, your staff, that have attended some of the pilot events, and so some strengths that have been identified. Definitely they like the fact that they are in their agency the first week. With the law being you have 72 hours of training prior to having any direct client contact, what we were noticing prior to the redesign was that a lot of participants only spent a day in their agency, possibly that Monday, and they were off the training on that Tuesday, and a lot of them didn't feel that they were able to really get a feel for how the agency worked. They didn't feel that they could contribute as much as they wanted to in the training because they just didn't have a background for their agency. So they definitely like being in the agency the first week. They are also liking the interaction that they're having with their supervisors, particularly through the use of the transfer of learning tool. So they are feeling a little bit more prepared when they come to the face-to-face classroom because they've had a chance to really sit down and meet with their supervisors regarding their learning. Definitely they're appreciating the trauma perspective, and more so the secondary traumatic stress, because I think that is big for a lot of new social workers. They come in wanting to do a really good job, but they oftentimes know that it is a very difficult job, and they're worried about being stressed out and possibly trying to prevent burnout. So they are really appreciating the focus on that. And as Ginger mentioned earlier, they're definitely liking the videos. What we're doing with the videos now, there's one that we've gotten really good feedback regarding, and that is a video that actually shows them how to initiate a CPS assessment. We get a lot of turnover in assessments, and the participants that are doing that really want to know how to get started, that very first knock on the door. So this video goes in detail regarding initiating the case with a parent. They really like that. They are able to pick up on a lot of things that the social worker did well, and even a few things that they may have looked at doing different. We also have incorporated videos regarding solution-focused interviewing, which is really big. A lot of participants come to training knowing a little bit about it, but really how to put it to use in child welfare. So we've gotten really good feedback regarding that. As Ginger mentioned, bringing the youth perspective into the classroom. We have a it's a very short video, but it's a very powerful video clip. It's only about 10 minutes, but it actually focuses on a child growing up in the foster care system and being placed in a group home. They love seeing it through the eyes of that child and how they feel, not only being stigmatized by being in care, but also being placed in what some people would refer to as a non-family setting with a group home placement. We've also, along with the new laws, incorporated videos regarding sex trafficking that we've gotten some really good feedback from as well. In addition to the stress, there are also some challenges as well. And so, again, in your chat, what are some challenges that you have heard from your staff with the redesign course? What are some challenges your staff has identified with the redesign course? And so some of the things that we've picked up on thus far with the pilot of the redesign is that there is a lot of information. So there's an overwhelming amount of classroom content, because keeping in mind that we had before 11 face-to-face classroom days, now we actually have 8 face-to-face classroom days. So there's a lot of information to cover during that time. And the difficulty, I think, with this is that we definitely want to do our best to be more learner-centered versus teacher-centered. So we want to make sure that not only are we putting the information out there, but they are also receiving the information, that they are understanding it, and they are pretty sure about how to go about doing their job. What we've heard from a lot of participants is that for time's sake, because again we're at 8 face-to-face classroom days versus 11, we don't have as many small group activities, so they really want to have more peer-to-peer interactions while they're in the classroom, and that's becoming a little bit more challenging for us, because what we're finding is that some things that maybe we would have done in a small group activity, we may be doing now as a large group activity, a large group discussion, again because it may save a little bit more time. So that is becoming, that is a challenge that we've heard from participants. Because the other thing to keep in mind is that we have really, really large classroom groups, and so they want time to spend one-on-one with other participants that are in the training with them as well. Definitely, they always want more time to practice what they're learning, a big focus on interviewing, a big focus on the tools as well. As Ginger mentioned, we still have the Hobgood case scenario, so we do follow that case from beginning to end. And so in doing that, we're also completing the tools that go along with not only the assessment, but also a case transferring into in-home services. We go over all of the tools for child placement as well. And in doing that, along with the case scenario, it can be challenging to make sure that everybody feels comfortable in practicing the tools. That particular skills practice that we do have in place in the training can be difficult sometimes. I think the other thing regarding the tool completion is that with the old pre-service training, keep it in mind, the transfer of learning week happened in the middle of the training, and so we had a chance to actually review a lot of the tools done initially by the assessment worker and have them practice those during their transfer of learning week. We're not able to do that with the pre-service redesign, so again, that's one less opportunity to practice completing the tools that we're hearing from participants that may be a little bit more challenging, and you guys in supervision may need to pick up a little bit more with them or check in with them more regarding their clear understanding of the completion of the tools when they return back to the training as well. So your role is going to be important in supporting your staff, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. You definitely have an important role when it comes to supporting your staff in pre-service training, and there are some things that you guys can do to support your staff, and these things can come before the training, during the training, and then also after they've attended pre-service training as well. Again, your role in ensuring before they actually come to training that our participant has the technology available to them to access and participate in the course is going to be more important now than ever. And so we have Southey here that's going to talk a little bit about the critical technology that is involved with the pre-service redesign.
Hi, thanks so much, Kaye. This is Southey. I'll keep my section regarding the technology needed for pre-service attendees short and sweet. I kind of live on the internet via email, so speaking isn't my preferred mode of communication, so I'll try to get to what I need to get to. First and foremost, the most important piece of technology you can have available to your employees prior to pre-service is going to be an active work email. It's one that is repeated sort of ad nauseum via some of the trainers, registrars, and people that have worked with pre-service, because to access that online portion of the training, they need to have an active work email via your office or agency. I know that sometimes IT can take a little while to set up an email, but we encourage you to, when you set up their personnel record first time, is to just enter an email. If you know that the email format's normally first name, period, last name, and then your agency, you can take a guess there. They can always contact the help desk, where we can immediately update their contact information and have their information sent to them. The second piece of technology they'll need is their NCSW Learn account, which is tied in with the email. They use their email and information to create that account, so that gives them access to the pre-service and any other courses that they're registered for. And then another one that we like to add on is Adobe Flash Player and Reader. These are technologies that are normally used since PDF workbooks are attached to most of our courses, and most of the documents that they're sent are PDF format. Going to just adobe.com, having them update their computer when they're getting settled in that first day and trying to access things online can speed up the process of getting registered for classes and getting their information that they need. You as a supervisor have access to quite a few tools via the NCSW Learn site. As you can see from the Supervisor Resources homepage, there's quite a few things that you can access. We like to point them out to everyone, that you can do everything from update personnel information to people that have been added to the system, register people for courses, search for training events, and then also one that we like to point out is to keep an eye on the schedule for your employees. One way you can do that is through the employee training schedule. Here on this slide is an example of that. It's a sort of a quick and easy reference for any employees that you supervise. You can see whether they have online or classroom trainings coming up. You can change which month and year, so you can kind of get acclimated to when people are going to be either out of the office for classroom training or when they're going to need time in the office, protected time, which you'll hear a little bit about coming up, to sit there and go through modules and go through trainings. And so we always encourage you to sort of explore the Supervisor Resources page. It's there at your disposal, and it's something that you can use to utilize keeping your schedule in sync with your employees and knowing where they are in their training and what they should be doing. So I'll go ahead and I can pass it back to Kaye, and she can get to the additional things you'll need before they start their pre-service training.
And thanks, Avi. And so in addition to the critical technology access that he just mentioned, there are also a few other things that you guys can do before pre-service training the first week begins. And again, I also want to point out, in your Tips for Success, that document in the Supervisor's Orientation module that Ginger mentioned earlier, that actually lists all of those technical aspects that Southey just reviewed that you guys can go back and look at later as well. I think in addition to the technical piece, the other thing that's really, really important prior to pre-service training is arranging that protective time for them, making sure that they have that uninterrupted time set aside, because that first week that they're in their agency, it's going to take at least 24 hours to work on completing the 13 modules, the 5 of the 6 online activities, as well as the 5 discussion forum questions. So they're definitely going to need that protective time to work on that. Also, making plans for them to be successful in some of those things. So, lining up coworker interviews. That's going to be important because they are required in one of the online activities to interview different people in different positions within the agency. And then also making plans for them to attend agency meetings. There's also an online activities that requires them to do that. So whether it be a child and family team meeting, a permanency plan and action team meeting, maybe even attending court. Some of those things are going to be taking place during that week that they're in their agency, making sure that they have access to those things. That's going to be important as well. And then also the social worker transfer of learning tool that Jennifer is going to discuss a little bit later, making sure that they have time to work on that. And during pre-service training, again, it's going to be important that you guys are checking in regularly with your staff to discuss any questions or any concerns that they may have. We make sure in the face-to-face classroom that we are providing a safe environment where participants are comfortable in asking any questions. The first thing that we say on day one in the face-to-face classroom is that there is no dumb question. The one question that they are hesitant to ask is one probably someone else is sitting back waiting to hear the answer to. With that in mind, there are a lot of questions that we get that are more county specific, so definitely checking in with staff regularly to make sure that they are getting answers to those type questions. Again, that protective time, we can't stress it enough that they have that not only during that first week while they're in the agency, but also during the face-to-face classroom, they have that protected time as well. Again, because it is law that they have the 72 hours prior to having any direct client contact, hopefully they're not coming to training with a caseload, but we do hear situations where they are charged with doing things back at the agency that sometimes prevent them from being focused clearly while they're in the face-to-face classroom. So again, that protective time, even during the face-to-face, is going to be just as important. And the support and the follow-through in completing the pre-service activities. Again, we as trainers are always available for them, even during that first week when they're in the agency. As Ginger mentioned, they receive a lot of emails from us supporting them. They also, again, may need that support during the training from supervisory staff as well. The other thing to keep in mind is considering travel time. Again, we have cut back to 8 face-to-face classroom days versus 11. However, what we are seeing oftentimes is that participants are having to travel a great distance in order to get to the training. We normally check in with them usually the second day of the face-to-face classroom that morning to get a feel for that, and we are having participants that are traveling an hour and a half to 2 hours one way to get to a training center. And when you think about that versus sitting in a classroom for 6 hours, it makes for a really long day. So also consider the travel time. One of the things that I noticed with the last pre-service training that we piloted was that there were several participants that asked my co-trainer and I during lunch to leave the classroom door unlocked so they can sit in the classroom and nap. And the reason being is because they were pretty exhausted because they had a really long travel commute for the face-to-face classroom, and they were required to do that all 8 days. So definitely consider the travel time and the impact that's going to have on participants' learning. There are things that you guys can assist with after pre-service training as well. And one of them will be reviewing the completed online activities workbook with your staff. And so a couple of weeks after pre-service is over, the online activities workbook will be sent back to the participant. And you guys also, it's sent to you actually to share with your participants, and in doing that, making sure that any questions that they have are answered as we're reviewing the online activities. We also comment, we give them feedback, but there may be some questions that they need answered by supervisory staff, so that's a way of supporting them after pre-service training is over. Again, meeting with them to review Part B of their transfer of learning tool when they return from the training. Jennifer's going to talk about that in just a moment. That's going to be important as well. And then the other thing that we're going to look at on the next slide is reviewing their transfer of learning action plan, which is activity 6 of their online activities. And so you see here is a copy of the Transfer of Learning Action Plan. And again, I just want to point out that this isn't anything that's new. This is something that we've had in pre-service from the very beginning. The time frame for submitting is just a little bit different at this point. And someone mentioned earlier, again, one of the challenges being clarification regarding the time frames for the Transfer of Learning Action Plan. And so, again, they're going to begin working on this their very first week when they're in their agency. When they come to the face-to-face classroom, one of the things that we have noticed is that oftentimes they're not sure of where their strengths are, where their needs lie, because this really is a strength and needs assessment for themselves. In doing that, thinking about those needs and how can they go about getting those learning needs accomplished. And so a lot of that learning takes place while they're in the face-to-face classroom, and then we ask them to submit the Transfer of Learning Action Plan that last week that they're in training. And so a couple of things I want to point out here, making sure that it is you guys are reviewing that with them. And in most cases, at least a couple of months after training is over. So notice here in this section that's highlighted, how did they go about accomplishing their objectives, and then documenting their progress here. Because the Transfer of Learning Action Plan asks them to identify at least 3 learning objectives, and each one of those learning objectives may have a different target date there. And notice beside the target date, when are they going to accomplish this objective? So really reviewing that with them can be helpful as well, and a big part of how you can support them when they return back to the agency.
Okay, I have a few questions for you really quickly. So someone needed clarification. The online activity book, is that sent back to the director or the direct supervisor?
They're sent back to the supervisor. We send them back via NCSW Learn, and so we usually address them to the supervisor.
All right, thank you. And then someone just wanted clarification. Are staff prohibited by law from being assigned a case prior to pre-service training or prior to the completion of pre-service training?
And that is correct, but that doesn't always happen. I have been training pre-service training there for 16 years, and I see a lot of situations, I shouldn't say a lot, but there are some situations where staff come in and they have already been assigned cases. And not necessarily a situation where they may have been introduced to a family that they're going to be working with, but actually assigned case management duties and responsibilities for that family. And so that definitely prohibits them from being able to be fully present in the training. And again, it's also against North Carolina law.
Thank you, Kaye. And one other question. So I know you're one of the primary trainers of the pilot. So another question is, what is the success versus failure rate with participants? And I guess meaning, how would you gauge training success in the classroom? What has been your experience so far with the pilot?
And that's a little difficult for us as trainers to fully gauge. One of the things that's built into the first week of pre-service training is a knowledge assessment, and that also gives us a little indication, because we are able to see the results, so that also gives us a little indication as to the learning that's taking place, what they are able to comprehend. Some of that takes place during the skills practice that we have built into the face-to-face classroom as well. And a lot of what happens once training is over and they leave the agency, particularly with the pilots, we're not really able to gauge that fully at this point.
Okay, thank you. And one final question. Will the supervisor receive an email alerting them to check NCSW Learn to get the workbook? So I don't know who wants to jump in to answer that question.
The email that we've been sending is the email with the transfer of learning, the online workbook attached to it. We don't normally send an email prior to sending back the online activities.
And so I would add that in general, those workbooks, online activities workbooks, are sent to the supervisor who's associated with the worker in the NCSW Learn system. So another plea for you all to be sure the accounts are updated so that the supervisor who's assigned to that worker is the one who's showing in NCSW Learn, because that would be the supervisor who receives the workbook, usually within, sometimes as early as within the next week after pre-service ends, or it could be as long as 2 to 3 weeks, depending on assignments that trainer has to be in a classroom before they can review that workbook.
And Tanya, I do see another question in chat regarding, I mentioned earlier in engaging success with participants. Someone asked, can we talk a little bit more about the knowledge assessment that I mentioned? There is a knowledge assessment that is at the end of their very first week. Then keeping in mind that first week they're in their agencies. After they have completed all of the modules, they have responded to the discussion forum questions. There are multiple choice questions that are part of the knowledge assessment, and there is no pass or fail with that, but again, we are able to see their results. And one of the things that we're doing is that we're using that as a learning tool for preparation for the face-to-face classroom. So trainers are reviewing that, and when they come for the face-to-face classroom, if we saw that there was a pattern there, maybe that there was a particular question that and again, we don't see individual results, we see kind of a summary result. So we see that there is a large percentage of participants that are getting a particular question wrong. Then one of the things that lets us know is that may be something that we need to cover a little bit more in detail, because keeping in mind what the knowledge that they're receiving during their first week in the agency, in training, those things are also reiterated when they are coming to us for the face-to-face classroom as well. So that kind of lets us know that maybe we need to spend a little bit more time clarifying that more in detail.
So I see there are still some more questions coming in. We are keeping track of those, and we will target those in the Q&A session. But we do want to switch to the transfer of learning piece, so I'll field it back to Kaye and then Ginger. I'm sorry, Jennifer. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Tanya. So in thinking about after the training, again, we have a polling question that we want to look at. And one of the things that we want to hear from you is how much information from training do you feel your workers are immediately able to incorporate into their practice? Which kind of piggybacks on the question that was posed to me as a trainer.
So folks will just click on the bubble beside the percentage of information you believe your workers immediately incorporate into their practice following the training.
And as the results are coming in, the other thing that I want you to begin thinking about as well is things that you can do to increase this percentage.
So it looks like most folks are saying 25 to 50% of the information that they see their staff incorporating into their practice consistently. Okay, thanks everyone.
So again, with those percentages in mind, what we would like for you guys to do is to use your chat box and tell us what are some things that you could do to support your staff's ability to attend and also get the most out of training. What are some things that you can do to support your staff's ability to attend and also get the most out of the training? If you would give us some feedback in chat.
And it looks like someone already, Kathy, thank you for that answer. Looks like you already answered both questions, 50 to 75%, but that relies on heavily on job shadowing with experienced staff. So very good point. All right, I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
So as you guys are typing, let's talk a little bit about, some of the things that supervisors have seen, either from my experience as a supervisor, but also as I'm going around to counties and talking with different counties. That first, when they are going into training, we want to talk with our staff about what they hope to get out of the training. That is a great start to introducing, processing through the importance of training being time away from the office, telling staff to turn off their phone, change their voicemail messages to have people call their supervisor, and encouraging them to not check email, recognizing that training days are just for training. I know it's not going to happen a lot in pre-service, but as Kaye mentioned, we want to discourage staff from scheduling home visits after the training. And if they feel that they absolutely have to attend a home visit after training, that they need to talk with their supervisor to get permission to do that before they do. And reminding them that training is an opportunity to really get away and just focus on what's going on in training. If they have other things scheduled during that time that they're in training, they are more likely to be thinking about that instead of really paying attention to what is going on in the training room. So again, these things, some of those aren't as likely to happen in pre-service. They're not as likely to get the phone calls, but it is possible, and so you just want to help get them started and prepared so they can get the most out of training. Some of the things that you guys have put in the chat box is somebody talked about a checklist for workers and checking in with them on their comfort levels. Somebody talks about weekly staffing and assigning a buddy. Let's see. Looking to see if there's anything else. So some people are asking for a copy of that checklist that Kathy is using. I don't know if that's something that she could email to somebody at the division, and we can look at seeing if we could get that sent out to everybody. So maybe we ask for them to do that, if Kathy is willing to share. So there's lots of ways that you guys can help your staff, as you've put in the chat box, and transfer of learning is a big piece, and transfer of learning is how we supplement the learning from the training room. So where does learning take place? The reality is child welfare staff need advanced critical decision-making skills that cannot be taught in a one-time training. From this graph, you can see that the vast majority of staff learning happens on the job. Formal training is absolutely necessary, but many workers struggle to incorporate what they learn in training into their day-to-day practice. When we follow up with staff before and after training and prepare them for what they can expect to learn, and then afterwards following up with the coaching them in the application of what they learn, we see a much larger impact on their practice. The statewide training system works hard to teach best practice skills, to demonstrate them for staff, and to have workers practice them in our classes, but we need your help. Workers need the support in order to implement best practice skills correctly and consistently, and this is where transfer of learning comes in. So what is transfer of learning? That is when the knowledge, skills, and attitudes we have learned are used on the job and benefit performance. Supervisors are an integral part of transfer of learning as we help staff transfer those skills into practice. As we saw on the previous slide, attending training isn't all that the staff are going to need to be able to do this work. Staff will not be able to remember everything from pre-service training, and they will need the agency's help in applying what they learned in the training room to the real world. They aren't equipped to carry a full caseload in their first week back at the agency, and each agency should have a plan for how they're going to coach staff and slowly build their caseload, incorporating the transfer of learning opportunities from coworkers and supervisor into the on-the-job training. So we want to use our chat box again and put in there, how do you help your staff transfer what they learn from the training room to the agency? As many ideas as we can get to share with each other will really help with staff in implementation of the new skills that they have learned. Some of the things that we can start with as you guys are typing is asking staff what they would like to implement into practice that they learned from training. Setting the stage before they go to training, letting them know that you might want them to present on a specific topic or share information with their peers. And if you have this conversation with them before they go into training, they're more likely to be paying attention and preparing for having that conversation when they get back from training. That also goes with what does the staff member expect and what does the supervisor expect that they will gain from their training. It also provides an opportunity for the supervisors to work with their staff to ensure they are following law, rule, and policy or best practice in their agency. And by the staff coming back from training talking about things, this helps agencies assess how is your agency addressing law, rule, policy, and having consistency within your unit and possibly across child welfare units.
So I just want to say one quick thing. This is Tanya again. So we are going to send out that checklist from Kathy, since it seems like all of you all want it. We will send that out to everyone that's registered for this event. So you don't have to type your emails. We'll go ahead and send that out to everyone since it's clear that everybody wants that information. So thank you, Kathy, for sending that to me, and we'll get that back out to everyone else. Thanks, everyone.
So some of the great suggestions that you guys have to help with implementing transfer of learning from the training room into the field is making home visits with staff for their first few cases that they receive and give some feedback. Having their staff present their topic of interest, shadowing gradual immersion into a rotation of assignments of reports, going out on cases with them, structured staffing time with the supervisor to discuss what they are doing on home visits. This is essential, especially in those beginning phases, having an increased structured staffing time. Letting them review old cases, having workers shadow them in addition to staff shadowing other workers. So those are all some great ideas of how that transfer of learning can develop from the training room into practice. So we're also going to talk about the transfer of learning tool. And learning transfer can be supported by what occurs at 3 phases, as Kaye mentioned earlier, before, during, and after a training event. Research shows that successful transfer of learning will result in a higher level of performance and increased quality of services to clients. It also shows staff that perform better on the job are more motivated to stay on the job. In 2014 and in 2015, the child welfare social worker turnover rate across North Carolina was 28%, and the supervisor turnover rate in 2014 was 14%, and 2015 was 18%. This turnover places everyone working in child welfare in constant strain. To be successful, not only after pre-service, but all trainings, supervisors need to be the primary ones directing workers' professional development. We know that training alone is not enough for maximum change in job performance, and the state's training system is working on addressing all 3 phases before, during, and after training events. We need the supervisor's help to do this effectively. Transfer of learning has always been in the guidelines for pre-service with the action plan that Kaye showed us previously. And to make it more tangible, we've added the transfer of learning tool for before and after training to support staff. Social workers need to be coached on what they have learned and encouraged to incorporate new skills into their daily practice. To feel competent in the field is a big part of preventing social worker turnover. So the transfer of learning tool originally came about the Child Welfare Supervisor Advisory Committee, which is made up of supervisors across North Carolina. This committee had been working on the transfer of learning tool for a few years. and introduced it to counties in 2014 on a webinar about NCSW Learn and Transfer of Learning. In 2015, the Transfer of Learning tool was piloted with assistance from UNC Family and Children's Resource Program in the course Responding to Child Sexual Abuse as an optional tool to be completed. And we got feedback from those who completed that tool on the content, how long it took. And then in Preservice Redesign, this is the first state training where the Transfer of Learning tool is incorporated, provided, and strongly encouraged for use by supervisors and staff. The link to the tool is provided to supervisors during the supervisor's orientation to pre-service. The instructions for the supervisor state before or no later than the first day of pre-service, week 1, make sure you have scheduled a meeting with your new worker to discuss the social worker transfer of learning tool. The workers are also provided the tool during their online introduction module of Redesigned pre-service, and they're encouraged to meet with their supervisor to review it if the supervisor has not already initiated the meeting. And we have found that there's been a mix of social workers introducing it and supervisors introducing it. But we highly encourage supervisors to be the one to introduce this. And this tool can be used for training, any training, division training or outside trainings, but it is expected to be utilized as part of the pre-service training experience. And this transfer of learning tool is also included in your handouts. Part A of the transfer of learning tool should be completed in partnership with staff before they attend pre-service. The training preparation portion is designed to ensure social workers get as much as possible from the training, with them thinking about what they hope to get from the training, and the supervisor to have the opportunity to also help them set goals for the training. They list specific questions that the worker would like answered about the training topic, and also it highlights the steps the worker will take to prepare to take the course and potential barriers for full implementation. Part B of the transfer of learning tool should be completed as soon as possible after the social worker returns for the training. Start with asking the staff what the top 3 things are that they learned from training and discuss these items. Encourage them to share this information at upcoming meetings with coworkers if it's appropriate. It's also helpful for staff to bring their action plan and discuss the action plan with their supervisor that they completed through the pre-service redesign. Document and discuss how the supervisor can assist the worker in achieving the goals identified on the action plan or what resources they may need. This is an essential part of transfer of learning, helping the staff identify what they want to put in practice and then get support and assistance in making it happen. Even better is when time has passed, reviewing the transfer of learning tool for progress updates. Are there any questions from anybody about the transfer of learning tool? If so, just add it in the chat pod before we go on to Ginger. I talked about that. Okay, it doesn't look like it. So Ginger, do you want to?
Sure, thanks Jennifer, and for all your work on that transfer of learning tool. That work started several years ago. Thank you so much for leading that effort. And in kind of summarizing that one-stop shop that I mentioned earlier, this is what the logo looks like. This is the logo that if you are a supervisor or a training manager, this is the logo that you will see on your supervisor or training manager resource page. You saw a glimpse of it earlier when Sudhi was showing you some of the features of that site. And so once you click on this supervisor's orientation to pre-service training, it will answer, it's narrated as I mentioned earlier, and you can also print out the script if you don't want to listen to the narration, but it's 10 minutes and it will give you all of the ins and outs of pre-service training and what you need to know in order to support your staff. I want to answer a couple questions that came in, and one of those is related to, you all had asked, could you see the videos? Well, you're not able to see the videos during the orientation, but you are able to see a number of things that give you great insight into what your staff are completing. For example, if you go to this supervisor's orientation, you will see a sample of what that online activities workbook looks like. You will also get a review of the technology that Southey went over. You'll see exactly what the discussion forum questions are, etc. Also related to one of the questions that came in about not knowing, let's see, does the supervisor get an email informing them of everything the worker has to do during the first week? They do not get an email, but they get the link to this supervisor orientation, which does include what we call the schedule table, which outlines and kind of gives a projected like which module and which discussion forum question and which activity they should be on, say, by Wednesday. Again, it's just a sample. You don't have to follow it exactly, but it really helps be planful about getting all the material completed, because I think that was one of the challenges that someone mentioned earlier. So that schedule table that's located within the supervisor's orientation will provide you with a template for how to guide your staff member. And also, there was a question about why is this not available to program managers? And again, this is a technical question, and I'm wondering if Southey or anybody has an answer to that. Do the program managers also have access to the supervisor's resource page?
I'm in with that. If you are a program manager within your county and for some reason you don't have, when you log into your NCSW Learn account, access to what's called the County Training Manager Resources section, which essentially has the same link to the supervisor's orientation that the supervisor resources page has. So if you're acting in a capacity as a county training manager or program manager and you don't have access to that, I would encourage you to contact the help desk. That way I can actually get your information. I'll need to confirm with your county director and just make sure we have everything squared away, and then I can grant access to that section of the site. We're always trying to encourage counties who have program managers or training managers who maybe don't have access to get that access, because it gives you essentially access to all your child welfare service workers and employee information, training attendance histories and things like that, and it also gives you access to the supervisor's orientation that we're talking about today. So I'll be happy to help anyone that needs that sort of access. You can contact the help desk, and then I can get things squared away with your county directors.
Thank you, Southey, for that clarification. Really appreciate your insight on how that works. And also another comment related to a question that came in is that as a supervisor, you will get an email. Again, if you're linked to this worker who's attending pre-service, you will get an email if for some reason your staff member has not started the modules. That's one of those examples that Kaye mentioned earlier about the correspondence between the trainers and the supervisors. Related to that, it's also very important, as that supervisor who is linked to that staff member in NCSW Learn, very important that you forward those emails if in your county a training manager or a program manager or someone else is in that supportive role during week 1 in the agency. We have no way of knowing that, and so we really count on you to forward that those emails, which often contain information related to maybe support that your staff member needs, or another reminder about the link to the supervisor's orientation. So, Tanya, were there other questions related to the supervisor's orientation that I may have missed?
So Anna Davis Perry just typed in here, so the only way to get information about the supervisor orientation is if you have a staff person attending pre-service right now.
Oh, great question, and thanks for that question, Anna. No, that's not the only way to get access to it, and I should have mentioned that earlier. The other way to get access to the supervisor's orientation is through the Dear County Director letter that is included in your participant handouts, and I believe it's on page 2, and the link that is included in that November 2015 DCD letter, which as you all know is always available on the NCDSS website. If you go to that DCD letter or just use the link right here from your participant handouts, you can view the entire supervisor orientation. So thank you for that question.
Let's see what else. I believe you already addressed this one. Where would the supervisor access locate the workbook after staff completion? So that would be in the supervisor's orientation module. And then does the supervisor get an email informing them of everything the worker has to do during the first week?
So let me clarify about the activities workbook. In the supervisor's orientation, there's a sample, just so you can get a glimpse of what activities your staff member is completed. But it's stamped on there, sample only or something like that. So it's just a brief glimpse. I mean, it's the whole workbook, but it's not one that you can fill in. But so you get a glimpse of the workbook, but the question about how does the supervisor locate the workbook after the staff have completed it, that's what is sent to you from the trainer, who was the pre-service trainer, who reviews the workbook and then adds some comments. So the completed workbook is sent to you by the trainer, who was one of the trainers in the pre-service event. And so the supervisor does not get an email listing everything, but they can access that schedule table that I mentioned earlier that is found as a printable document in the supervisor's orientation to pre-service.
Great. Thank you, Ginger. So I know there were a couple of questions of folks about being able to access the supervisor's orientation. So Sudhi and Philip are chatting to folks privately. So if you have in your chat bot, if you see a yellow blinking icon, that means that they're trying to chat with you about that issue, so we can provide clarification to that. I don't think there are any other questions relevant to this topic right now. Ginger, is there anything else you want to address before we move forward to general Q&A?
I don't think so. There was a question earlier, which you may be getting to, about the transfer of learning content. And since we're not going to be offering the live online session, we are planning the pilot trainers and all of the pre-service trainers are meeting soon to talk about how and where to incorporate some of that content into either the online or the face-to-face classroom experience. So that was a question I appreciate from earlier.
Thank you, Ginger. And if folks have other questions, please chat those into the chat pod right now. We do have a question that's been lingering for a while. So someone wanted to know how the changes will be integrated with current policies. Would anyone like to speak to that? Or do you need more clarification on the question?
I think I understand the question, but if I start answering and I've misunderstood the question, if somebody would please chat to me the clarification. I'm hearing that there's a question about the changes that have recently occurred in law and policy. How are those going to be integrated into pre-service? Is that the question? If so, we are on top of that. I would have to say with confidence, until something changes tomorrow, what is current as of now in terms of the laws and policies related to child welfare practice in North Carolina, we have incorporated those into either the content in the online or in face-to-face classroom discussions or in participant handouts. And I'm looking to Kaye. Am I exaggerating that, or do you think right now I'm on top of it until we get another law or policy change?
And Ginger, that is accurate. And just to give you an example of that, we were in the middle of a pre-service training a couple of weeks ago when the revised health status component and physical examination forms came out. And so the ones that were in their pre-service workbook were outdated. They're no longer online, but we made copies of the new ones and passed them out and reviewed them during that training.
And Cindy, I see your clarification about the results of the learnings we've experienced from the recent CFSR. I would say that as we go forward and the program improvement plan is further identified, then there will be ongoing updates and ongoing changes to the pre-service content to reflect whatever those findings, learnings, and those decisions that get made as a result of the CFSR. Once those have been clarified and finalized, which they have not been as of today. They're closer than they were. We will be incorporating the things that are appropriate into the pre-service training.
Thank you, Ginger. So just wanted to mention a brief clarification, and this comes from our technical staff here at the School of Social Work who manage NCSW Learn. So anyone who is a child welfare supervisor should have access to the supervisor's resource section of NCSW Learn, and then will have automatic access on the homepage to see the supervisor's orientation. So there's a couple of questions lingering. Someone just mentioned if you registered staff for pre-service, would it say that it's the pilot one right now?
Okay, great question. So the final pilot event, the registration is still open. So the June event that begins in Asheville that you probably would still see on NCSW Learn, that event would still say pilot. All the other events for the July to December that are showing would not say pilot, because we have finalized the pilot phase and have incorporated input from the pilot trainers and the pilot participants into the version that is going to be available beginning in July. So there may still be one event that says pilot. All of the other events would not say pilot, but be aware those events from July to December are this redesigned version, meaning 3 weeks versus 4 weeks.
Thank you, Ginger. And we have 2 more questions that I want to get to, so this means we may run over till about 12:05, so folks will bear with us. I just want to get these 2 questions answered. So someone mentioned, while it's a great idea for seasoned staff to retake pre-service for updated information, is there a mechanism in place to ensure that staff retaking it don't take a new staff member slot?
I appreciate the interest and concern in not taking a slot. I guess from a registrar standpoint, what we could certainly do is begin tracking for that. And if it is a supervisor and if we're at capacity, then we could certainly discuss that and let someone, if there's a waiting list. But typically we have been able to get everyone in, but thank you for alerting us to that we would need to kind of be mindful of that.
All right. And then I think we have a comment from Kathy Dobbs. Ginger, would you address that one about the pre-service pilot new events?
Okay, Kathy, yeah, it seems that we, okay, so I thought there was some timing. Yeah, anyway, we're, as you all can tell, we're right at that merging from the pilot to the non-pilot title, and I know Vilma has been on top of that and working with Southey and Philip around that. So sorry if I was confusing about that, but I believe we're right at the point that we're making that transition, and there's only one more pilot event, and all the others are non-pilot, which again, they meet the 72 hours, and they're the 3 weeks versus 4 weeks.
All right, thank you, everyone. So it looks like, Kathy, if there's a question for you, so we're pulling you into our webinar this morning. Thank you, Kathy. But there was a question from Kristen. Let me roll up to see. Kaye, can you remind us of that question? They're asking you to address that question, Kathy.
Yeah, there's a question regarding, is it possible to hold a training / refresher for program managers and social work supervisors only?
So we'll give...
And I see Kathy is typing, yeah.
Thank you, Kathy. You didn't know you were going to get pulled in this morning, did you? So feel free to chime in on that, Kathy. I do want to address a couple of folks' questions and concerns. So one thing we just want to mention is that if you've had technical issues along the way and your audio was going in and out, this webinar was recorded. So we encourage you to go back and look at that webinar, especially if you're interested in the question and answer piece that we've just talked about. We also encourage you to share that information in your agency if you know there's other supervisors, program managers, leaders in the agency that need this information. Please share that with them. We're just going to wait for Kathy to give her response. If there are burning questions in here, we can also address that. We're going to be sending out a follow-up document that will have that checklist that Kathy Hitchcock so graciously agreed to share with us this morning. It's also going to have a summary of your wonderful suggestions that folks chimed in about transfer learning, things that you're doing in your agency right now to help staff incorporate what they learn into their practice. So we'll have a summary of helpful hints for you, and then we can also address some of these burning questions that are out there. We want to make sure your needs are met on this. Kathy or Kristen, it looks like Kathy is asking you to email her directly so that she can give you a response to that question. So in the essence of time, we do have to wrap up our session. So here are our contact information for our wonderful presenters this morning. Again, we don't have Southey's contact information on here because he is the person behind the help desk. So of course, you can contact him via NCSW Learn using the help desk. Also wanted to just remind folks of the helpful information in the handouts. You have all of the slides from our session this morning are in there, the bios of our presenters, a Deer County Director letter about the pre-service changes, the pre-service redesign overview and chart, the transfer of learning document. There's a really good Training Matters article that is hot off the press in there. So hopefully this information will be helpful to you.